So Dennis, man, look at this news. Tinder made more money than Netflix and Disney Plus. And I know of cases where people have committed suicide because they were locked into a room because of this
Yeah.
lockdown. You're an NLP master practitioner, you're a life coach, you're an executive coach. Tell me, is loneliness really that big a problem right now all over the world?
I think loneliness. I can speak to the United States FQ, and loneliness is it's estimated that over 4 million people. So 4 million people in the United States suffer or experience chronic loneliness, and that's just not being able to be by yourself. It's more about like true chronic loneliness. And so it's estimated that that's truly one of the biggest contributors to mental illness here in the United States is loneliness, yet we give it very little credence. I think it's extremely important because I think if you look at loneliness, that is what is dictating a lot of the behaviors that we're seeing, with people once things kind of finally open up or relax on the standards of the SOPs just a little bit.
I have a question. You just said loneliness, which is not the same as being on your own. Please elaborate on that.
Yeah, so I'm just meaning being able to spend time by yourself. There's a difference between feeling isolated. Like I personally, I like to be by myself. I'm perfectly comfortable. I don't feel lonely that often, but there are times when I feel isolated. So, but that isolation can then lead to feelings of loneliness. So I think sometimes we get it confused. And I think that really, like when we're under lockdown and quarantine and nobody's really like engaged in their everyday life that they spent so long building, it's easy to feel isolated. When we feel isolated, we can confuse that with feeling lonely. Loneliness is actually that I am alone. I don't really have friends. I don't interact with others, whether it be through Zoom, telephone, or even the distanced contact that we're allowed to have with one another right now.
Okay, so here's the thing. You said in the US, I'm going to expand it and make it international. Loneliness is also a problem in Europe, especially Scandinavian countries.
Yeah.
And even in Japan, relationship issues and shit like that.
Japan, it's huge.
Yeah, it's huge over there. So here's the thing. Is this a byproduct of industrialization? Is this a byproduct of non-nuclear families? Is this a product of just the way relationships are dealt with? Because in my part of the world, a lot of people are in really crappy relationships. Just yesterday or day before yesterday, one young girl committed suicide because of an abusive relationship, and that thing is all over the news right now. And the gentleman who's a broadcaster himself is under arrest. So the thing is, people over here are in crappy relationships, and they feel trapped, and because of social pressure, they can't come out of them. So that is also kind of loneliness, where you're in a situation where you're just terribly unhappy, and you're in a situation where it's not working out. So the loneliness you're talking about is in the industrialized world. In the industrialized world is different, where you're not caught in a bad relationship. Well, most of the time there are cases there as well, but generally you can get out of a bad relationship. Yet just the way that society is structured, work 9 to 5, 5 days a week, you're busting ass, you just don't have time for relationships, and relationships collapse, and people end up living on their own or being alone, and that leads to being alone leads to being lonely.
That's correct.
So that is a byproduct of industrialization. Now, this COVID situation is obviously forcing people to be a lot more on their own. Why is that, in your experience working with so many people, becoming a problem? Why are people having trouble being on their own?
Well, I think that there's a couple things. One is, yes, I think the industrialization does play a part in it, and does factor in. And really, when I refer to loneliness, I am talking about people that you might. So there's a different set of, it's different. So here, like over here in the West, we might get into a bad relationship, but like at the end of the day, I had a choice. I had a choice in entering into that relationship. Where in your part of the world, marriages and stuff are arranged, and other people, there's a lot of factors that go into that. For me, there was factors that went into it for me, but at the end of the day, I still had a choice. I had a choice to either enter into it or not. When I refer to loneliness, I'm talking about the feeling that even when you're surrounded by a lot of people, even people that you like or that are in your circle, and what happens is you still feel alone. You still feel
Yeah.
that sense of loneliness, even though. So I think we're talking about something that's a little bit deeper. Where I feel that
Yeah.
the loneliness really comes into play is more about feeling connected. It's this feeling of connectedness, and whether or not that is, with a spiritual deity, whether that's with other people. As far as to your question, yes, I do think that loneliness is playing a bigger part right now because we are so disconnected from one another, and we are social creatures. So in many ways,
Yeah.
the lockdown, and we need to be locked down, but it kind of goes against our human nature of being social creatures. It goes against our human biology, really more than our
So,
human nature,
right.
but biology for sure.
So I want to go into that direction. What you just mentioned right now, very good. I want to go in that direction that we are social creatures, and
Yeah.
maybe just the 9 to 5 and chasing the. I mean, I'm going to plug in your other show, Back to Basics. We have gone so far away from the basics that we are caught up in that useless monotony of making a living. That's another debate completely. That how much you need to work. We have given up our fundamental basic instinct of being social creatures and the need
Mm-hmm.
for partners, the need for groups, the need for clans, the need for tribes. I'm avoiding the word families because we've been talking to a global audience, and families play differently in different parts of
Sure.
the world.
But it's
But we
all
do need
tribalism.
people. It's all tribalism. There you go.
Absolutely.
Exactly. So we need that structure, and I think what's happened in this society, and maybe COVID is reminding us directly or indirectly, that we need to go back to basics. We need to create those groups and clans, and we cannot try to exist in isolation. There's another tangent I want to plug in there. That,
Yeah.
you know what, in your part of the world, like yesterday, you're talking about people are saying, why are you wearing a mask? I'm saying, why are people getting into other people's business? Because in the industrialized world, people do not get into other people's business. Everyone minds their own business. That also leads to certain kind of isolation, where I have the total capacity and the right to screw up, and no one's going to come and tell me, "Hey, dude, you're screwing up." And once I've screwed up completely, they'll just say, "Screw you, we don't need you." Whereas in
Right.
my part of the world or other parts of the world, non-industrialized world, people do interfere, and somebody would stop you. Hey, what are you doing, man? Don't do it. A family, friend, neighbor, somebody. But
Yeah.
so that's another problem. That's another cause of isolation because people are not getting into other people's business. Pros and cons.
Yeah, that's an interesting side. I have been on such a mind your own business kick. I don't know that I really considered the other side of that. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Um,
Yeah.
to me, I think it comes down to that when I talk about minding your own business, to me that is you look at like if I see somebody not wearing a mask, I have a tendency to get very worked up, very emotionally attached to that topic,
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
and that's what I'm talking about. That's what really creates that feeling of isolation or loneliness. Because again, you're around all kinds of other people, but I'm alone, and what's making me alone is my belief system. So all these people, and right, we use these generalizations. Big, broad, sweeping generalizations. The truth is when I actually look around, there's way more people wearing a mask than not. But we focus on the stuff that is different, and instead of
Yeah.
looking at our differences as a positive thing, we look at them like, oh, you're trying to screw me, because all of this comes from this personal perspective. What I
Sure.
think is really happening, FQ, is we have, and I'm not, again, pros and cons. We scroll, scroll, scroll. All of us are living in a
Yeah.
scroll through society right now. And unless you're living in a country where they're talking about ban, or they have banned certain platforms and so forth, it's been interesting. Many of my colleagues in Egypt, I can't communicate with them right now because they shut down all their social media platforms recently. Several of them, anyway, the ones that we communicated on.
That's another discussion we need to have one of
We
these days.
absolutely do.
Well, how stupid is that one in this time and space in the world? How why and how would you do that? Anyways,
Yeah,
screw
I
that.
mean,
So,
it's the inability to
so
sit
coming
with
back
our
to
own
isolation.
thoughts. Uh huh.
So coming back to isolation and loneliness, do you think it's time for people to again form smaller groups of interaction and support system where the industrialized world has completely lost that? I think it has lost it.
Can you repeat that, please?
Okay, let me give you an example. I have a very dear friend who's British, and he's like very very close to me, and we do get into each other's business. But 50% of the time he's okay when I get into his business, but 50% of the time, if I get into his business, he gets really irritated, really. And we go back a long, long way, and we've had shared a lot in life. But it's not innately. It's not in his innate upbringing. It's
Right.
not fundamental for him to take interference in his life,
That's
which is a very industrialized thing.
yeah.
Whereas in other cultures, non-industrialized cultures, it is very common for even somebody just walking by you to get into your business. Hey, you're doing this right. You're doing this wrong. It's very very normal. So what I'm saying is COVID showing us this new back to basic concept that we need those people now. That we need that
Perhaps.
interaction.
I'm telling you, man. Like you're bringing up some stuff, and I completely empathize with your UK friend there. Yeah, because you're telling me
Wait a
this,
minute.
and
Wait a minute. Wait.
yeah.
Before you answer, I'm going to replug this. About 4 weeks ago, Dennis had he didn't have a situation. He was perfectly okay. I felt he had a situation, and I interfered in his business. Said, "Hey, Dennis, in my very careful way that you might need to look into this situation." He took it well. He was nice about it. He wasn't. He didn't tell me to bugger off. So but that was just him being polite. So go on, man.
Yeah, that makes those hairs on the back of my neck stand up. That is I don't know if it's Western culture or Westernized or American. I'll speak to United States. Listen, we just don't do that over here. Even like in my state, this just happened recently. When I go to other countries, like when you drive, one hand literally stays on that. You have one hand on the steering wheel, the other one's on the horn, right? In my
Yeah.
country, you do that. You put your hand on the horn anytime. I mean, anytime. That's a signal to get out of your car and fight. I'm not joking. Like you get out of your car and you fight with somebody that's going to honk with you. People they'll honk their horn and they end up getting shot in the face. It's not a joke. And that's because it's taken as a form of you're trying to tell me what to do. And that's like here in the U.S., we do not like that at all. And in fact, a story that we have that's really interesting. Right here in my own state, a city council member, the city voted to take in everybody has to take and wear a mask.
Yeah.
Well, the city council member that voted no, yeah, guess what? As soon as that happened, he's like, "Oh, well, no, he then arranged a protest. He scheduled a protest for people to come and protest the rules his committee created." I mean, what are we doing? So it really, to me, this comes down to we don't like to be told what to do, and we have such an inability. We are such a scroll through society. We don't have we have created this inability to sit with our own thoughts. And so guess what? When I'm sitting with my own thoughts, well, I want to go outside. I don't really like wearing a mask. Why don't I like wearing a mask? I don't like wearing a mask because these people wear a mask and it came from over. And now we just create this crazy ass bullshit internal dialogue that's completely false. And now that takes and exacerbates things like loneliness. Because that's what we focus on, as opposed to, well, what can I do? Instead of getting to know ourselves. I think one of the biggest things right now, we talk about communication, we talk about connecting and staying connected. I think COVID's a great opportunity to learn to connect with ourselves.
Yes. So you agree when I said that COVID is reminding the world that we need that social interaction. We need to open up more. We need to let people into not our lives, but into our protective circle. We need to let people talk to us. And when you talk about scroll society, Tinder, since the app and discussion Tinder, that is also swipe left, right, yes, no, and you keep having these interactions. But I think deep down, the back to basic fundamental is kicking in, and people are needing conversation. Mm-hmm. People are needing interaction, even though in the industrialized world they are trained and brought up not to. But inherently they're craving it.
Sure.
Am I right?
I completely agree, because again, it goes, that's biology for us. It really just is. And I mean, you talk biology, now we're going to get into the whole nature versus nurture conversation, but you're talking biology and programming as well, cultural norms, teachings, learnings, and so forth. All these things that end up programming us into,
Sure.
the belief systems and the values that we hold and so forth. So I again, I do think that the most important thing, because we all figure out ways to stay connected with other people, right? I mean, I don't know too many people that don't. Even and to that point is people that 3 or 4 months ago were saying, I'm not going to Zoom or FaceTime. I'm not doing any of that. I mean, we've had such an uptick in people over the age of 65 video chatting with their grandkids. So I think it's actually really good. It's forced people that weren't going to take advantage of communication platforms. It's forced them to do this. Again, where I see the biggest problem, where I see the biggest challenge, and this is a little bit, one of the things I've been dealing with this week is one of my, as an employee assistance provider, one of the businesses I work with, the business had a suicide. The business had a suicide, and I was working with the boss, and the boss and the owner of the business ended up reading the suicide note to me today, and it was just terribly, terribly sad, terribly painful to hear that another human being was going through that much suffering that on the outside you just couldn't see. So what I want to say, FQ, is I do think loneliness is killing people. It does not surprise me in the least that Tinder had so many hits. It made so much money.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, people want that connection as opposed to sitting there and zoning out watching Netflix. So go ahead.
Also, since people were in the lockdown, they were not necessarily meeting. There was not necessarily interaction,
Right.
but they just needed someone to talk to, someone new to talk to, a stranger to talk to.
Yeah.
So they
Yep.
needed conversations.
Yes. And I'm noticing even when to that point. Oh boy. About to get photobombed with my little dogs here. So what I've noticed is even on platforms like LinkedIn, I'm having more and more people reach out and go, hey, would you like to grab virtual coffee? Let's go ahead and chat. As opposed to, here's the marketing, sell to you, sell to you, sell to you. More people are looking to engage. And I think it's wonderful. I think it is a back to the basics movement. And it's like, hey, let's get back to our true nature, our biological nature, and connect with one another. I'm going to take one step further, that performance psychology part of me. Connect with yourself, figure out, spend time sitting by yourself, spend time with you. I mean, I'm just going to come out and say it. If the last person you want to spend time with is yourself, that doesn't say much about you. If you think that your own self is boring, I mean, let's have a conversation about that off camera, because
But I'm a proponent of talking to strangers. I am
too.
deeply into that, and I really, really miss the IRC chat rooms. They were fantastic. I made some amazing friends back in the day when you'd get an IRC. Are you familiar with IRC? You're old enough to be familiar with.
I don't know that I'm familiar with that one.
Oh God, before all these chats, before Yahoo chat or AOL chat came out, there was IRC, Internet Relay Chat. And there were rooms like SIGs, like special interest groups. So you would go to these Undernet or Dalnet, and there were these various chat servers. So, and there were thousands of people. The internet was very, very small back then, but there'd be thousands of people, and they would all be in special interest groups.
Right.
And there you could talk to people in an open room and then break into private conversations if you wanted. It was a phenomenal concept. IRC still exists for people who are not familiar with it. You can still look up IRC. I think Dalnet and Undernet are still running, even though very, very few people there. But it's running, and you should go there. It's a fantastic experience. One of these days, I'll also tell you about the UUNet groups, which were eventually taken over by Google, and you can still find them, google.com/groups. That was the very beginning of the internet group chats, group messages.
Interesting.
And what's scary is, I will not tell how, but you can actually find my shit from 25 years ago.
Interesting.
When I actually had a bulletin board called the Angels Base BBS, I used to run it, and my operator's signature was Damien. If Irfan
Interesting.
Afzal's online, he would remember, because Irfan. That's actually how I met Irfan, who joins us sometime. I
Okay.
met him through those BBSs back. I think this is 25, 27 years ago.
Isn't that interesting? I just want to come out and say, because I heard this a lot before the pandemic, and that was that, oh, face to face, it's just so better, it's just better, it's better. And yet the interesting thing is that I have, there are people in my life that I feel I have extreme love for them. I care deeply about them, and I've never once met them in person. You're one of them. I mean, here's a perfect
Thank you very much.
example.
Touche.
Is that we've never physically been in the same room, and I don't feel like I need to be. There's other people that all I've ever done is chat. Chat. So I think that we just need to take and start being a little bit easier on ourselves, taking and challenging our belief systems, where how communication happens and the way that it should happen and so forth, as opposed to it has to be this way. When we attach ourselves to the way it needs to be, man, that's when we create those expectations, and we always end up getting disappointed because they're not even realistic expectations. So loneliness, it does not surprise me. Good for Tinder. I think it's interesting how much that their business is growing. Even though the whole point of Tinder is to like connect, right? I mean, you meet online and then you go somewhere and you meet and you connect face to face. And now what they've done is even they have taken and created and provided a platform rather that is allowing people to stay connected and so forth, even if maybe it will lead to a love connection at some point or a date, or
Sure.
I don't know. But I think a lot of times we just have to open ourselves up. The world has changed. We have to open ourselves up to new ways of connecting and staying in touch, because the loneliness factor is absolutely devastating. It's just absolutely devastating. And when it makes total sense to me, and I don't even begin to understand suicide. It's such a painful topic. But I understand the mentality of, if nobody cares or gives a shit about me, what's the purpose in going on? So I just want to say, let's really, the way that we combat loneliness is, I don't know that we necessarily need to be in each other's business. However, being in each other's business as far as taking care of one another. Even if nothing else, we just simply reach out to somebody maybe we haven't spoken to in a while, maybe somebody we had a negative interaction with, and just reach out to them and say, hey, you know what? We're humans. Like, let's put our stuff aside. Let's stop fighting. Let's get through COVID. Once we re-enter the world, and then we can go back to having belief system disputes and arguing with strangers over the internet about stuff that doesn't matter. So I think,
Right.
absolutely.
Let's quickly have a look at the comments, man. I'm gonna start with this fantastic comment by Aisha. She says, "Completely agree with you both, boys. Thank you, thank you for realizing. Thank you for realizing. We need to remind ourselves to find ourselves in this COVID time. Yes, ma'am.
Find ourselves, absolutely. Connect with yourself."
Khushbu has made an interesting comment saying, now if you DM someone whom you don't know, they can screenshot your messages and post on the groups or start Me Too campaign against you. Yes, thank you very much.
Right, but
just messaging someone you don't know has become such a nightmare. You're right. Thank you for pointing it out.
It can be, sure. But I also want to just point out that, and I'm mainly talking to men here, is that there is a fine line between creepy and complimentary and being kind. So let's just make sure that we're not being creepy about the whole situation.
Well, let me also. I'm going to address the women as well. Just because somebody says hello does not mean they're trying to get into knickers.
That's correct. Yeah,
and it works either ways. I mean, men can be creepy. Women can also be creepy in their own way.
Well, and I'll just say, I think it's a little bit better when you don't have that expectation, because then when somebody actually does want to get in your knickers, it's just that much more exhilarating and exciting, right?
There you go. Fair enough.
Set yourself up for success.
All right, let's get to the top. Khushbu says, does long-term relationship also the factor of loneliness?
Can. It absolutely can. And Khushbu, to that point, April and I just celebrated our 30th anniversary, and there have been times that even though we were married, we felt incredibly lonely. And that all had to do. We lived right in the same place and everything else. Connection is a deliberate act. It's not something that just happens. You have to be very deliberate. You have to participate. So
yeah, you got to make an effort. You're right. That's the word, participate. You got to make an effort and participate in the relationship if you really want that connection. Nadeem says, good discussion. Well, welcome, Nadeem.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very important point. Usually people here in the East don't even realize it is a problem or issue. Is an abusive relationship better than loneliness? That song, "Owner of a Broken Heart," is much better than the owner of a lonely heart. Who sings it, Dennis? Owner of a lonely heart.
You freaking
much
jerk.
better than owner.
I can't think of it.
For people who don't know, both Dennis and I share this extreme love for music.
Owner of a Lonely Heart. Is that Juice Newton?
Sung by Yes.
Oh, okay. Darn. All right. Well, FQ1 DT0. Party on.
Okay. Khushbu says, and then she added, agreement. Sometimes being in the wrong relationship can also make you feel lonely. Absolutely. I think that is the biggest reason for loneliness.
Yeah, agreed. I agree. I think, when we have to do things on our own, we figure out, we get to know ourselves and we figure out how to be by ourselves. It's always that, a lot of times in a relationship, especially long term, when you develop these patterns of thought, patterns of behavior, patterns of communication. So all these patterns that come into play, and it's just important to at least acknowledge the fact that these do exist. And if you don't take and constantly reevaluate them, reevaluate, reassess, reengage, you will fall into that rut. So I completely agree. And Bushra, you're absolutely correct. You can be lonely while in a relationship. Absolutely, 100% correct. And in fact, I think it's easier. I think go ahead.
Even in a good relationship, not necessarily in a bad relationship.
Totally.
Even in a good relationship, you can feel like you get a dead end. You stop growing. A lot of things can happen even in the most perfect relationship where you can feel WTF, what the F.
Bushra, this is interesting. Mindfulness, the universe inside. Sure. The only thing I'm going to challenge with that, Bushra, about mindfulness is, again, it simply comes down to when I've worked with people on mindfulness, and I'm assuming you're going to have the same as you work with more people, you're going to find this as well. It really comes down to the fact that people don't know how to take and sit with their own thoughts. And when people start to learn mindfulness techniques, what a lot of times they find is that, again, the person that they dislike the most is themselves. And so it gives them an opportunity to make that connection with themselves. So mindfulness is extremely important. Codus Force Individual called, these small groups. I love hearing about these small groups. I think it's amazing. It's just a way to take and stay connected. When we stay connected and we actively participate in each other's lives, then we tend to feel loneliness less than when we just try to go around and do everything ourselves. And so Amber lip sync, I'm not sure what that
man.
That's referring to, friend.
Here's this one. Check this out. What advice to people who are single in this quarantine? Because some people don't like to interact with strangers or feel comfortable. Well, here's a catch, Khushbu. I mean, you're single, but you don't want to talk to a stranger, so you obviously want to stay single. That's all I can say. Because if you don't want to be single, you will have to talk to some stranger, unless if you want to get married to your cousin, which is fine, if that works for you.
And that does not work for Khushbu. I know Khushbu, and that does not work for her. So,
well, then Khushbu, she's going to have to talk to a stranger then.
I understand where you're coming from, Khushbu. And yes, it is really that challenge. And I'll challenge you that's perhaps a comfort zone that you're in, is that how do you interact with strangers or feel comfortable? I think sometimes those are just those are skills that we really have to take and deliberately practice and learn. As far as just making I'm very much in my head. I'm very introspective. Making conversation, it's not something that I just come by naturally, especially with somebody I just meet. So people usually have to take and ask me questions. For me to take and make a connection with somebody else, it is a deliberate practice that I have to take and say, I'm going to engage today. and it can be quite exhausting, and especially when you're putting yourself out there. And no, Rafia, we don't think you want to marry your cousin. So
I want to welcome.
Thank
I'm sorry. I want to welcome Mr. Farhan. Hey, Farhan. Thank you for joining us, and good mate of mine. And yeah, you're right. The British group. Yes, there you go. Thank you for joining us, Farhan.
Perfect.
Good to see you, man.
So that's I think the only Kushbu, I think you're making a big overgeneralization there. Don't marry.
Oh, that's
How
fine.
about-
Hey, but
how
if that
about-
works for you, that's fine, man.
How about don't marry a dumbass? That might solve. That might solve that.
Or do what I dare not say online.
So I will just kind of finish with this, which is that, at the end of the day, I think that the best thing that we can do for each other instead of for me, what I have had to do, and I'll just share this with those that are watching, is that I have a tendency to get very upset when I see people not wearing masks, when they're not acting responsible or anything like that. To me, I have switched my focus to, instead of worrying about what people aren't doing, I'm going to take and focus my energies on doing something deliberately to take care of somebody else. So for me, I just simply ask myself the question, how can I take and create a story of care for this person today? One little thing. That's all it is. It makes the world a better place. And when we make the world a better place, when we feel less lonely, and we're not so attached to that, we don't realize what kind of idiots our world leaders are. Makes our life a whole lot better.
Thank you, Ahmad. Welcome aboard, man. I guess that's about it, Dennis.
Thank you so much,
Sign off.
everybody.
Thank
Have
you.
a great
Good
week.
night.
We'll see you back Monday.